facilitated wherever you are, and that you'll have to find a way to be able to deliver IP connectivity to a subscriber no matter where they are. And this fixation on physical location or the method of use will become less important over time. So I think that the market will change that way on some level. And I think you're starting to see it in some markets around the world where, you know, HSPA running at 7.2 megabits per second is starting to have wireless substitution impact not only in the voice business but also in the data business. So you're going to get multiple carriers into the marketplace from a wireless perspective, because the broadband market is not all created equal. I mean, it probably is a little bit more biased in the market we're in because it's San Francisco and we're close to the valley, but not everybody needs to have 10 megabits, 20 megabits, 30 megabits per second. Some people, imagine it or not, still just use it for email and very like web surfing. And for segments of the population, you know, there are going to be a lot of different alternatives, whether it be Clearwire in the market with a WiMAX alternative, an HSPA provider with a more aggressive data plan, you know, running at 3 to 5 megabits per second, or your local telephone company or cable company, or maybe non-facilities-based providers as well.
You know, I think it's probably also, Serena?
Broadband for quote-unquote light surfing, but I think light surfing has been a moving standard, as you mentioned in the opening comment. Now YouTube bandwidth, which for many people is now light surfing, and my father spends a lot of time on YouTube looking at old jazz videos, and he's not really a cutting-edge kind of guy. And you know, I think that you know, broadband speeds have not really kept up with that, and I think a problem with calling saturation is that we need to be careful what we define as broadband, because that standard of what you need for light surfing changes, and I don't think we've all agreed on what counts as, what's the minimum level for broadband. And I was just checking my notes, and the FCC defines broadband as 200 kilobits, OECD defines it as 256, ITU defines it as 1.5 megabits. So maybe there's a question to the panel, what counts as broadband? Oh, and final note, using the OECD definition, US comes in 15th for broadband penetration right now. So what counts as broadband?
That's a real good question.
Maybe the question is not the broadband itself, but what you put on it. Just take the fact that in August we will have the Olympics. And you know what? I think that will be many, let's say, being interested in getting this Olympics, let's say, on your mobile when you leave your home, because you've just seen, you were just following something, and then you want to keep on, let's say, following. So it means that if you look at those specific contents, those needs, you know what? We'll not have enough broadband. The speed will not be enough. The quality will not be enough. It's where we have the challenge. And the challenge will be to see and to have a seamless service, because it will be less and less acceptable just not to get the information you want when you want. And for me, it's more about, okay, we can define a lot of things, but it's about the services that are used and what we want to do with them. So I would suggest, rather than, and sorry Gary, to focus on the broadband demand, but to look at the services demand. And here we have the services, and I'm absolutely convinced that we will have the demand. It's just a matter of, let's say, make it more popular and that type of things, and maybe cheaper.
So since we've been in the internet business, I don't think we've ever cared what the OECD or the FCC or any other third party defines as broadband. We get measured by whether or not our subscribers can do what they want to do with our pipe. And I'm not, to be frank, I'm not really even I don't really understand what the point of that definition is, because no one refers back to the FCC or the OECD as, you know, they said it's broadband, thus we can call our product broadband. So we don't really play at that low end of the marketplace. But I think that I agree with you. Clearly, we're seeing this shift now in usage, where what was once a relatively small number of subscribers who are using fairly advanced network services is starting to broaden out. So the number of people under the curve of advanced services is much larger as a percentage of the population than we've ever seen in the past. And we can see it even in our own growth. You know, if you look at our own growth numbers, you know, if we never added another subscriber and we just did same customer base year over year traffic growth, it's going to be in the 50 to 100% range, depending on the year you count it for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. So we're definitely seeing that. But if you look at it, the underlying technologies that we're all operating on, whether or not you're a wireless carrier or a wireline carrier, are all continue to improve over time as well. So the baseline is kind of in sync with the continued growth in the usage. I think you have to be a little bit careful because we always get beat up with the OECD numbers. The OECD numbers are based on per 100 inhabitants. So depending on how many people are in an average household, your ranking changes. It's not it's not the logical one, which would be how many households per 100 have high-speed internet. It's how many people per 100 inhabitants have high-speed internet. So it does tend to shift. So if you come from a jurisdiction or geography where you have low density per household, you can actually get much higher penetration numbers than you can if you come from, say, a North American marketplace where you do tend to have a fairly large number of people in a household.
Yeah, this is Serena. You want to say something?
Just to Claire's point about services, Gary earlier talked about over-the-tops, and they're going to be there. So can you comment on what you're doing or you're thinking about or planning to work with the over-the-top, as working with them as over-the-top application service providers?
I'll go. The reality is we over-provision the pipe today. Right, we over-provision it for, I mean, we have this continual debate in the industry, you know, will they enforce quality of service? Will they, you know, slow down access? We over-provision for 99% of the applications. If you want to run an HD streaming service on our network, well then, yeah, I've got a problem. But for most of the experiences that consumers want, I'm providing you more than enough capacity to be able to generate a high-quality experience. So the condition we have to live in is that there's going to be a significant amount of quote-unquote over-the-top services that are sometimes enhancing what is the experience of the consumer, and sometimes replacing what we would have traditionally experienced or described as core. That's reality. Like, get used to it. Like, we should just get used to it. That's just what's happening. And as I was saying before, you can make phone calls on the network today using voice over IP. You don't have to take our home phone product. That's just the practical reality of competing in 2008 and beyond. And so I think where we have to decide as operators is, where do we add value? We're in an open system. You cannot just stick yourself in the middle and just say, hey, give me some money. Because that's not sustainable, because there's always a way around you. And so the question is, when we take a look at where we're investing, what infrastructure we're putting in, what intelligence you're putting in the network, how are you demonstrating that to consumer? And that's multifaceted. I mean, we tend to always fixate on these technical questions, and really at the end of the day, when we do a survey of our customers, most people don't really understand what the technology is in the network. They focus on things like we talked about today. They focus on things on price. They focus things on service, availability, things that really aren't relevant to the technology discussion, but they measure us on a much broader scale. And so we have to decide, how are we investing in the network, and are we adding value so that we can insert ourselves into the margin chain? And if we can't, in just a straight commercial negotiation with someone, make a good, compelling pitch as to why we add any value. I don't care if it's cost of acquisition, ongoing maintenance, service, displacement, whatever it is, then we don't deserve a part of that revenue. And that's just the way business works, and that's the way it's going to work on an ongoing basis, I think. And we have to decide what we're going to actually invest in as well.
Okay, I'm getting you've got to get off the panel. Your panel's expire time, so please join me in thanking our panel for a nice job.